Good evening and welcome to 61st Historic Illustrious Sheetal Conversation Sunday evening 7 p.m. IST show. I hope you guys are doing very well this Sunday. You must have celebrated it very finely as per your plans. And all of you are in the best of the moods and best of the spirits and best of the health. I earnestly greet once again to all our ever-expanding galaxy of esteemed, erudite onlookers across the country and continents of this visible world. These eloquent and placid Odysseys, in a way, are piercing through the clog and the haze that has cocooned our spectacular age of great civilization of Kashmir, to which we all belong. The cathedral crown and cradle of Indian civilization. And I suppose these situations, these programs have gradually over the last 61 episodes been able to reach to the hearts of the people through these wonderful, storytelling narratives by the great authors, the people who have visited these conversations, these conversational shows. Our visitors are very well learned, and well exposed personalities and the legacies who have this able to create this ambience by means of employing their brilliance, their knowledge, their intelligence, their understanding in unfolding these very ravishing and evocative anecdotes. Anecdote is a format of little conversation. That's why it's being loved by the people across, who are its witnesses, who are its followers, who are its admirers. Today again, I feel that we are yet another crossroads, yet another magnificent moment is passing through. As I feel today that 61st episode and show is yet another milestone in its own way. It has its own new dimension added onto it. Today we are going to introduce another wonderful, charming, informative and interesting addition to the Sheetal Conversation series by the title of the eminent author and the book. So as the name implies, you can well understand, we can go to the life and times of the illustrious personality, his contributions to the society, and his the best of his piece of literature which he has written, one of the most acclaimed authorship that he has given, one of the best possible book that he has written, which is very popular across the horizons, across the different sections of the people and population across the globe. So this is a very, very important day and an important chapter that we are just doing today. And I must tell you that a small lad, a small boy who was born in Kashmir, and he studied somewhere in Rawalpindi or some other place, did his graduation, and then went to the Lahore to study journalism. Just year before the partition happened, he was able to witness the entire gruesome picture, this debacle, this horrendous picture of the partition, one of the biggest tragedy of our subcontinent. And he was privileged enough to note it down, jog it down, report it, because he had started his career as a reporter. Till finally he went to Delhi to meet one of his in-laws who was a very, very eminent politician at that point of time. And he was also a very great journalist himself. The gentleman who worked with the first Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, for a brief stint, has many, many dimensions added to his personality, which need to be explored in this program. And his name is Som Nath Dhar. Som Nath Dhar, the eminent journalist, former news journalist, former director of All India Radio News Services, which is equivalent to now, Director General of PBBCI. He has also been a formidable diplomat and information and intelligence officer, who has also been a great faculty at Indian Institute of Mass Communication. There are many, many dimensions to this great personality. He was a great storyteller. He was a great videographer. His entire career has been crisscrossing through the corridors of power with the men and matters of those times, in the post-partition times, which was literally, which became the basis and for making the edifice of the modern history of India. Good or bad, that's all depends upon the perspective of the people, varied sections of the people. So today we are going to talk about him, and also he's one of the very illustrious books which was edited and published posthumously after his death, and that is titled as From Partition to Operation Blue Star: Tales of a Journalist, uh, Bureaucrat, and a Spy. It seems to be very, very romanticizing that Hollywood and espionage thriller, but yet, that's all for the sake of being defense in the movies. But in real terms, what is the espionage? What is the intelligence? Probably it's entirely a different world. And today we are going to talk about life and times of this personality, and also about to this book, his contents of this book, and just try to swim around what this great man, with his whole understanding of those times, behind the curtain, witness of this time as a journalist as well as a person being very close watcher of the parliamentary developments, proceedings, and other things connected with his profession, and as a diplomat and as a covert intelligence officer. So we'll be all covering it, and we are very fortunate today that we have two wonderful ladies in the studio. One of the great noise. There's some noise around. I don't know where is the fault. It's not here at least. But anyway, we'll try to sort it out with the time. So, two great ladies which are in the studio today, and they are luckily and the proud daughters of Som Nath Dhar ji. Uh, their names are HASNAIN and PAMPOSH Dhar. They both presently live at Singapore. HASNAIN is a very widely traveled, eminent personality who is a former, alumni of Delhi University and Oxford University, where she has studied English literature, and she has also been a very Buddhism practitioner and Buddhism propagator. She has been, teaching and propagating Buddhism, taking classes and lectures on Buddhism, of course. And along with Taraji, and she is also one of the faculties members of the Delhi University. She has been the faculty member of Delhi University, and also the Singapore Management University. And at present, her passion is about the book editing, which she does at the Singapore, where she lives with her family. And then we have Pamposh Dhar, a very formidable journalist like her father. She has been, and she is also a public, communication specialist who is now doing the counseling in meditation, counseling and coach of the meditation. She is also a Reiki master. So these two people are here, and we know about the title, and this title is all exposes and explores the journey, the stories, the bioscope, which will cover the times of the partition, and later on the association of Darsaf with Jawaharlal Nehru ji, while serving him as a press man, as a person who could brief him on the press those times, and also then we'll talk about the other dimensions of the book and other things. And without much delaying, let's welcome to the studio these wonderful two, progenies, astute progenies of Som Nath Dhar into the studio with great warmth, great reverence, and great affection. And I hope this is going to be a very, very interesting and formidable program. Although we have some interruptions of, the sound interruptions today. I don't know from where they are coming. So I mean, I'm sorry for that, but we'll try to speak slow so that our voice is audible. And let's welcome these wonderful, great, brilliant, intelligent, and beautiful ladies to the studio. Tara and Pamposh, you are welcome into the 61st historic, illustrious show of Sheetal Nath Conversation. It's a great pleasure to have you guys with us. One is a formidable person who practices Buddhism, probably Zen theory, I don't know what. And another is a Reiki expert. I'm also a bit into it. So I think vibrations will already be very dissolved and very, very, very soft around, accepting that we have the sound interruptions. So you are welcome into the studio today's show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Anyway, if you want to say thank you, I'll thank you again. Do you want to thank me for inviting you?
Of course, I would love to say that. Thank you for putting us even on this show and also accepting to talk about Papa's book, which I think is precious to both of us. And in a sense, it encapsulates his life and career, which, even for us is a wonderful thing, but for the rest of the world, I think to know him a little bit. But very much appreciate. I think you're too flattering in your introductions to us, but yeah, I'm very touched.
I have all noble purposes.
Yes, it's quite amazing what you do.
Your voice is a bit cracking. If you could put those earphones, can you put those earphones? Sorry, there's a problem of audio probably.
If I may use
Just
this,
a minute. It will take a minute.
I hope that's better.
Yes, it's better. It's better. You were saying something, Pampoji. You were telling something.
No, I was just saying it's a great pleasure to be here.
Yes.
And I've watched some of your previous programs. I think it's quite wonderful that you do this week after week after week. Quite amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure. And your magnanimity, despite your busy schedule, and Tara was indisposed, and you still came. I think it's a great honor for me, for the spectators, because we are going to unravel this wonderful, mysterious journey of your father. And to begin with, as per the paradigm and structure of this program, is in our first segment, we take our visitors to the lanes of the childhood. So let us all swim together to your childhood in Kashmir, especially in Kashmir. And I know about it that Pamposh was very small at that time when your father was posted in Kashmir. And Tara was 10 year or something, she was 10-year-old. But 10-year-old is a great, a very recognizable cognitive experiences of 10-year-old are fine. So I think you can tell us about Kashmir, the lanes, the ecology, the sociology, the people around, the family, the siblings. You can even expand it to the Delhi and other places where you live. And given the overall view of Kashmir, your later visits also to the Kashmir. Let's talk about Kashmir. I think we should begin from Tara, because Tara is already a senior person here, as she says, but she doesn't appear to be senior here.
I'm just pulling privilege. Thank you. But let me start by just offering my apology to the viewers. This is not going to be a perfect one because of the sound factor, but we decided let's go through with it. And I'm really grateful that some of you were there last week, and you have come back on it now. So yeah, I thought whatever it is, we karte hain, and let's get through that. I was not too sure what I would focus on for the memories. I thought it was more about Delhi, where I was really, really born and raised very young. But let me switch to Kashmir. As Jugal said already, I was 10 years old. Our father was posted as AIR special correspondent, All India Radio special correspondent, to cover JNK. And we were there from early 60 to late 62, till November 62. So
Okay.
that's the period I did my middle school. But my own schooling at that time was pretty much disrupted because we were used to be part of the Darbar move. So
Oh
every
my.
6 to 7 months, it was like, first Srinagar and then to Jammu. And I had to switch schools, though they were both convent foundations, but they didn't have the same syllabus those days. So
Okay.
I was rushing around, and then, we'd move in late October, and by early December was my final in Jammu. So I don't remember that much about the Jammu part, but I have clearer memories of Srinagar. Also, because of course I related much more to Kashmiris and Kashmir, because in Delhi also, while I was being raised as a child, as an only child, basically till that time,
Oh
um,
yes.
we had some stable, very close family, like our grandparents, Papa's only older sister and brother-in-law, and they were there with us in every festival, like Shivratri or Navre or Pan.
Nowadays.
Yeah, we would all go and be at their place because Badi Mummy, as I called Mrs. Bamzai, she treated Mummy like her daughter-in-law, and we treated them like our grandparents. So they were Bade Papa and Badi Mummy, KN and Mrs. Bamzai. So anyway, let me start with Kashmir. If there's time, I can talk a bit about Delhi. I think my memories of Kashmir will probably be a little bit generic for all of you. I had the sort
Yes.
of, one step in Kashmir and one step as a non sort of as a person raised in Delhi, that kind of attitude when we got there. So I was very familiar with a lot of things that could be new for others. For instance, I knew Kashmiri food very well, though I mean, I loved being introduced to more types of Kashmiri breads. And I mean, on a
Okay.
daily basis, there was a kandur that one could, send our cook to, and he could get
Bakery.
kulchas and, kulchor and bakiran and all those things. I had had them from time to time in Delhi, but obviously this was different. And of course, I had been raised with the elders in our family all speaking Kashmiri to each other. We were taught Kashmiri, but we were not so fluent, or I wasn't, because in school I was, speaking English and Hindi, or even with my friends in Delhi. So
Okay.
Kashmir that way was very nice for me. And actually, my parents felt this when he was moved back to JNK for some time. They were very happy for themselves, of course, to be visiting their home state, but for the daughters, for both of us, because they said it'll be very good for us to experience living in the land of our ancestors. And that's what did happen for me. So I was like, I was used to Delhi, for instance, which had lots of bicycles and lots of cars comparatively, even in those days, in the early sort of late 50s, early 60s. And
Okay.
one of the things I remember noticing was, wow, so few cars and everybody's walking, and not that many bicycles compared to Delhi. So, and the climate, oh my God, I noticed the beautiful climate. I remember it was so much fun because we were in Srinagar, of course, in the spring and summer and autumn months. And, and then I used to love going to the gardens as a young child. I loved the gardens, and my parents had got a picnic habit right from Delhi days. We used to pack a picnic and go off here or there. So we kept still doing that, followed our habits, but now it would be in a beautiful park with bird song. And I love the trees, especially the chinars and the tall poplars, like to me, they look like gods standing guard over us. That was one of the things I do remember. And of course, there were visits. Papa had no family ties by then. I mean, A lot of his family unfortunately had passed away, or he had lost touch with, the people, because as a child he was taken away from Kashmir. His father was in a, in the post and telegraph service with British
Okay.
in India, and they lived in a lot of so he was in uh, United Punjab, and would be posted from town to town, every few years. So Papa himself actually also did not really grow up in Srinagar. Mummy at least was, I think, lived there till she was 13. So yeah, so I mean, I was used to Kashmiri, but I was not used to hearing it all the time around me. And if everybody was speaking Kashmiri, it was so nice. I learned more, I think, that way. So I was a little embarrassed to speak with people who were so fluent. I do remember some of Mummy's distant cousins, comparatively distant, visiting us, or we would once in a while they would invite us to visit them. But they seem to prefer visiting us, I noticed. I don't know whether that's the right impression or not. But our immediate family on both sides, all Mummy's 6 brothers and sisters were outside of Kashmir. Papa's only sister and brother-in-law, Mr. Kashinath Bamze, and his wife lived in Delhi. So these would be more distant relatives, and they didn't really leave much impression on me. Except that, of course, I was told by my parents, I said I couldn't take any spicy food. And a lot of food for me in Kashmir was more spicy than I could handle easily. And they would warn me when we were invited to one of Mummy's relatives' places. They said, be polite, eat what's in front of you, just take more rice. You can wipe the food with the rice. But it was delicious food. I enjoyed the food anyway. So yeah, I mean, it was, and I remember visits to Adus, who was my favorite.
Adus.
Uh,
Adus.
my
It was
father's.
existing in those days also. 61, 62, you say?
Yes,
It was
yes, yes. It was a flourishing place that time. And we would
okay.
often go at sort of snack time, I don't know what, because I remember the adults having coffee, but I would love having the sandwiches and other snacks that I could as a child. So it was not
And about
coffee meals.
coffee house also. There was a coffee house in those days.
I don't remember any other place, but Papa's book talks about Nagin Club and Lake Palace Hotel, what has a different name now. I
Okay.
do remember being taken to the Lake Palace Hotel and running around as a child because they had beautiful gardens, but they didn't make such an impact on me. And to be honest with you, that it was a time in our lives. I had grown up as a very young girl earlier with a lot of Papa's attention. I will come to that when I talk about Papa, when you ask me
Okay.
about it. But here he was very busy. He was very busy. He was doing extensive touring, very often with Bakshiza, who was the prime minister at that time. And so it was Mummy, Pamposh, and me. And Pamposh was really a baby in a way. She was not even 1 year old. So,
Oh,
yeah, so we would go out for walks, or I do remember we would regularly visit Shamla Dhar, Shamji's place, this because he was my Mausa's father. And
okay.
we lived in a nice house, two-storied house with its own garden, in a quiet part of these were new houses in of Residency Road. So Arduz was very close. But I seem to remember that even Exchange Road was not that far away. So we used to visit Shamji's house quite regularly, and little by little, I came to think of him as my own grandfather, just like my master's daughter. Obviously, he was her grandfather. So
Oh,
that was a stable presence in my memory. And that's where I would meet Sudha, because she was also living with them that time. You had her on your program, Sudha
we had
Kaul.
one session with Sudha. Sudha Kaul.
Nehru, of course, and then Nirja ji before she became Mattu, was Shamji's daughter and my mother's youngest sister. So, and I learned to call her Benny, like my cousin did. So she's still Benny for me. So it was a sense of state being with close family, really, and they were very loving towards all of us, but especially me and Kamposh. So, and we would go for walks on the pond, and I would love to go for rides on Dal Lake. I guess any child would. So, I'd heard about all this. I knew Kashmiri, but it was a different experience to actually be there and do these things. which was lovely. And we went to, Verinag and Pahalgam and Gulmarg and Mutton, I remember. Also Shankaracharya, the famous
Yeah,
temple on Shankaracharya. My parents are not really religious much, but still, these are places that are holy to all of us. And yeah, my father actually would always talk about Makhdoom Sahib and Tasveer Sahib. He said, we must go there when I grow up.
okay.
But also, I remember one or two visits to Kulumula.
The
Uh,
Kheer Bhavani also? Kheer
Kheer
Bhavani?
Bhavan. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Kulumula is what they used to call it.
Tulmul, Tulmul we say in Kashmir.
Yeah, so some of those things really stick in my mind. Of course, we did a lot of things that maybe other tourists do. I do remember that I found the meal timings of Kashmiris a bit different at first because we were used to, we go off to school or Papa would go off to work, so we'd have early breakfast. Then I'd come back to a late lunch and then dinner. And here, people would say they didn't eat. I mean, they ate their lunch really at 10 o'clock, it seemed, and then they would just walk to work. And then they would come back and eat their dinner at 6:30. And that was not something I was used to. And we couldn't follow that because our routine was different because I was in school and all that. So to me, those were kind of little bit new things to learn to understand how the local people live. And I saw them as I was part of them, but my first identity, my primary identity was Indian. So I was an Indian and a Kashmiri, or an Indian Kashmiri. But I was not a Kashmiri first in my thinking. I mean, I'm just telling you my thinking as a child. Because, I've been raised in Delhi and I used to go to school, and none of my friends are Kashmiri. There were no Kashmiris in school. So it was only restricted access, only my immediate family, the uncles and aunts on both sides.
But you were a Kashmiri, your parents were Kashmiri. I mean, your parents were culture was Kashmiri.
Yeah, Mummy's was a call, and we will be talking about.
We will be talking about it in the coming part of the program.
Yeah, and how they were introduced to each other when you asked me about Papa and all those memories. But yeah, I think I've talked enough. But
No, you talk nice. You not talk enough. Actually, program's format is short, so we can go on and on.
no, the only one little thing, if I may say, and that's about Pamposh, pardon me, Pamposh, but
Yes.
she got to love cherries. And she was,
Okay.
the moment she saw them, I mean, she was barely speaking, must have been the second summer we were there. Cherry gilas, cherry gilas. She was always asking for cherry gilas. And that continued when we left Kashmir and came back to live in Delhi.
The theory of samskara and impressions, There's some impression out there. Sometimes the time immemorially remains with us. Anyway, I'll just move ahead, propel ahead. सब लोग जिधर वो हैं उधर देख रहे हैं. दाग दहलवी का एक लाइन है. I would like to cite it. सब लोग जिधर वो हैं उधर देख रहे हैं. हम देखने वालों की नजर देख रहे हैं. So let's go to the core subject of this program. That's your father, Som Nath Dhar, eminent personality. First of all, to begin with, I would like to say, as a great daughters who have also done great, they have a great reputation, public reputation. They have done great things in their own lives. How do you see your father as daughters? How was he at the family, with the siblings, with the friend circles? How was his discipline? How was his culture? What was his day schedule and character and the humor and all the aspects of this personality? We'll talk about the public aspect later, but we'll first talk about all the aspects of his personality. I think we'll go first. Pampoji, would you like to start?
Sure.
Both will
Sure.
say something.
I think as a daughter, the first thing I want to say is that he was a really hands-on father. He was very, very attached to the family. And I think later in life, when we got to talk as equals, I realized that he considered that his greatest achievement in life because his parents died when he was very young and he was left penniless when his father died. and he built up his whole. Yeah, he did two jobs, and he was doing the journalism course in Lahore when he started life. So from that he built up, but he did not consider money or something as very important. He said to me, he said, my greatest achievement was building a loving family. And in his book, he has dedicated it to Mummy and Tara and me. And he says, when he dedicates it to my mother, he says, my wife and life partner, not just wife, but life partner. So I think he was very, very close to the family, more than perhaps some other fathers and husbands. I don't know. I'm not judging others, but he was very close. And other than that, he was a very jovial man. He had this very infectious belly laugh. So when he would laugh, everybody would laugh with him. Sometimes he'd start telling a joke, and before he got to the punchline, he would start laughing, and we would all laugh, even without knowing how the joke ended. So very infectious laughter, very optimistic man. He had suffered a lot as a child, but he didn't talk about that. He had seen a lot of bloodshed, with partition and everything, but he always looked ahead, and he always tried to find the good in every situation and in every person. So that's my basic impression of him. The other things, he was very independent. His self respect was very important to him as well. And I think he taught us that as well. Never lose respect for yourself, never do something that will make you do that. And because he was trained initially as a journalist, I think he was really committed to truth. He was very objective. And in his book, also, he has tried to be very, very objective when he describes events. And that is the greatest strength of the book, I think.
That's so wonderful. I think you have defined him very well. Taraji, you would like to put on some elderly, seniorly words into what was your father? How about your father?
First of all, I have to apologize. I thought Pamposh was also going to talk about her memories. So I didn't
That's
talk about hers. And I
that's
really
okay.
What
must
is it?
say, for me, it was extremely important that she had come into our lives because she was, she was less than a year old when we went to JNK. And oh God, I was just fiercely attached to her. If my parents, by any chance, anyone scolded her, I would be crying before she could have any reaction.
Oh,
But anyway, so let me switch to this. Pamposh actually has taken a number of words out of my mouth. Some of the things I was going to say about Papa, especially how fiercely attached he was to his family. Even before Pamposh came along, even from when I was born, we had 10 years together. I could see how much he loved Mummy and how much Mummy loved him back in return. They always, because that time, they were kind of still tighter for money and all that. They were a younger couple. They'd had a child within a year and a half of their marriage, me. But always very generous and always stood by each other through the difficult times, the good times, really always backing each other. So I won't say more on that because Pampoch has said things so well. I remember he said to me once about this that he said, "You people are my jewels, and I have no jewels that are more precious than you all." And I think really he was expressing his even in his career or his moves, his various moves, his first priority was us. If it was not going to work out for us, he would refuse. The Pamposh has said quite a lot of things that I would have said. But I would like to say one thing because I saw him more as a younger man, just starting off with married life and, starting this new career and all that because I was born in 1950. He always looked for the positive in every situation. And I was a frail child over a number of years. But he always found the positive to focus on. And people around us also noticed that about him. As Pamposh said, he was very jovial. He was known as for the whole family In fact, I think Sudha or somebody had a comment even on this thing about, the good times, and Nisha, yeah, our cousin had put a comment here. And they all called him Samosa, because my Mosa daughter called him Mosa, which got shortened to Samosa. But then all the other girls, they still called him Samosa. So that this uncle was Samosa, and he was happy with that. And he would even pull the leg of some of the family members, but they knew it was because he was jovial. He wanted to bring in a light atmosphere. And plus, I did notice, especially in those early years, when I was still a child, really small child, he tended always to look forward, though with a sense of history, with a sense of, what one went before. And I remember he told me once, he said, take from the past, but take the best. Don't get imprisoned in the past history of your country or your people or your family or anything, because you must move forward and take the best also from what you're seeing. Science, you have the possibility of that kind of education. So that was very important. And for me, one thing about Papa, he was very empathetic. Everyone would notice that. We didn't have much money to spare to begin with, but he would really listen when people talked to him, and especially people who were less well off than us, even the part-timers who came to work for us. If they had a problem, he would listen genuinely and support them as much as he could, even sometimes take their children by car or scooter or whatever we had, to the hospital. So, and this was something that everyone around us noticed, his family, extended family, as well as even people in his career. And he said, everybody helps their superiors or people above them, but they won't even remember. But you help somebody who really needs it and is helpless, they will always remember, even a small thing you do for them.
That's so great.
It came naturally to him. And I think his, the earlier life problems had not made him bitter at all, which is saying a lot.
That's so great.
He was very gregarious and he was very social, and he blossomed, and he loved to go out and meet people, loved to have people over to our place, and especially when we were in Delhi pre the JNK stint, when there were the three of us, we would still have picnics, and I was an only child, so he would pick up neighborhood kids on weekends, or Ashok, my same age cousin of Chandaji, his sister's son, and because he was also growing up like an only child because his siblings had left the parental home. And we would all go off somewhere or the other, India Gate or wherever, go to the boat club, hire a boat. So we were really a picnic lot. And one of our uncles, one of our mamus, used to call them the honeymoon couple. So if he called and I said, "Wo bahar gaye," he would say, "Oh, honeymoon couple, out at it again." And yeah, I just want to say a little bit about the time that he spent with me. I think maybe because he had more time then, he was more junior, and there was only the one child. Especially closer to bedtime, he would put me to bed. And he would sometimes read me a story, but more often he would tell me stories. And very often these would be stories about his heroes, people that mattered to him. And his biggest hero when I was young was the Buddha. And he would tell me about the Buddha and his ethical path, not very difficult, but very important if you could stay on it. And it stayed in my mind always. I was also attracted, but also Mahatma Gandhi. The peace, the open-heartedness, accepting every human being as an equal human. That was very important to Papa. And I did grow up with that. And of course, there would also be stories about Mahadev Bisht. And
Yes. I'm going to do next program is about the Robin Hood of Kashmir, Mahadev.
Oh, really?
Yes, I researched over it. It's a wonderful subject. Mahadev.
Well, I heard those stories, and
He was a Robin Hood in those times.
Yeah, before Pamposh was born, of course. And another one I remember, I don't know what the story's name was, but anyway, maybe it didn't have a name, and Kashmiri story. And then it goes there, these two thieves who go out to this old lady's place to burgle her. And then they have this code with each other. He says, Sonozukar Paninkam, Butchus Heritage, the Chukbon, keep at it. But the old lady is smarter than them. She cottons on, the thieves have entered, puts boiling water or something on them. I don't know how it ended, but she made them run away. So I used to think, wow, these Kashmiri people are very brave people. So anyway, but
You belong to a great lineage. You belong to a great heredity.
yeah, and he spent a lot of time one on one in that way with this very young child, and that kind of stayed in my mind. If I was sick and I didn't want to eat, it was Papa who would persuade me. It's just one Raja Mendu. Have this, and I'll tell you a story. Mommy would get fed up. She would say, ye tara khana nahi khati easily. So yeah, he was very patient with the children. Same with Pamposh, I think. But of course, when she was very little, he was very busy. And then there was Mummy and me. Me particularly, I don't know, telling stories and whatever.
No,
Yeah.
no, no. He was not too busy.
Oh, okay.
Well,
Well,
Not
okay.
at all.
that.
So that's it. Let's talk about one more aspect. We'll come to this beautiful story that God sent you. And I would like to ask one thing. Probably Pampos would like to reply to that. Let us. How do you view the public life portrait of your father? In a brief summary, let's first of
Mm.
all unfold the public life portrait of your father. In a brief summary.
So, actually, very, very briefly, the title of the book says it all, but I will give you a little more detail.
Yes.
So, he started his working life in Lahore, and it was not an easy life because he was doing his master's degree, and the day before his final exam, his father died in Kashmir, back in Kashmir. So, Papa actually didn't do his exam, and yet, so he never got a master's. He got a diploma in journalism, and yet he ended his career as a professor and head of department. So that's another story. But anyway, he started in 1946 as a newspaper reporter in Lahore, writing for the Herald. In
National Herald.
No, the Herald. It's a new.
The
So it
Herald.
was a Pakistani. I mean, there was no Pakistan then, but this was a
Undivided
newspaper in
India.
Lahore. Yeah. So in 1940, in May 1947, he moved to India because partition was imminent, and he had covered some of the riots, so he knew how bad it was. And immediately he got a job as Pandit Nehru's personal assistant in Delhi. So he worked there for a few months, but very crucial months. So they included partition and independence. And then in September 1947, he went back to journalism, but radio journalism this time. So All India Radio. He joined first as a sub-editor, I think, and then he went on to be a correspondent. And he worked in AIR for a long time. In 1963, he joined the government. There used to be something called the Central Information Service, which is now called the Indian Information Service. So he joined that. He worked in various ministries with various ministers, and he's written about some of the events he witnessed in government, including Indira Gandhi's rise to power, which is quite interesting, and Mahatma Gandhi's assassination as well.
Okay.
And of course, it was for AIR that he was posted to Kashmir as well. In 1970, he joined RNAW and went into covert operations. And he was posted abroad, mainly in Kenya and Austria, and I was with my parents still. Then he came back in 78 to his parents' service. He ended up as head of news for All India Radio, and he retired as head of news All India Radio, and then immediately joined the Indian Institute of Mass Communication, where he was the head of department for courses for government probationers. And briefly, he also worked in the private sector, but this was mainly it. After that, he continued to write articles here and there. So that's a quick summary.
Uh, Actually, now I would like to go. Let's talk about the book part.
Okay.
Let's come to the book. Now, we have talked about the author, and we'll be talking about the author more
Hmm.
in the descent of this program. But let's talk about the book. The book seems to be very, very wonderful title. As I said, it seems to be a Hollywood blockbuster espionage thriller, and from Partition to Operation Blue Star, tales of a journalist, bureaucrat, and a spy. Spy is something which makes it very different. It makes it more like a Roger Moore, Sean Connery type of a thing. But in actually, the espionage and intelligence has different dimensions.
Yes.
But we people just normally think that he has to do something like Roger Moore does. Let's know about the conceptualization of the book, because I heard that this book was actually published and edited posthumously after your father had finally
It was
gone to the
published just after he passed,
okay,
1 month
edited
after his passing. It had been edited.
already. Okay.
Mm.
So let's talk about conceptualization of this book, inspiration, intent behind this book, and the whole process of titling this book. Title is something which is very, because if we go to the title only, then there are three pillars and three fires of this book. Fires of this book. One is the partition, another is the blue star, and third
Mm.
one is then spying part. These are three pillars. They seem to be. So let us know who has done this title and how this title has come, and what was the concept of the book, what was the intent of the book, how has it been carried out, and how did you finally publish it? Tell us
Okay.
something about this.
Okay. So actually, this book was a work in progress for a few decades, I think. He started writing it when he was, I mean, a long time ago. And he wrote some articles which later also covered the same events as well. But he had a lot of material, but he had not put it into a book. And when in 2010, my parents moved in with us, with me and my husband, in Singapore. And he said, "Now, beta, you have to deal with it." So I said, okay. So I put it together for him first as a manuscript. The material was all there,
Mm.
but I edited it for him. Then the publishers later did their own editing. And we sent it to a few publishers. I used an agent in India, he helped me. And HarperCollins immediately came back and said, yes, we want to publish this book.
That's great.
Then they asked us to strengthen the latter part of the book a little bit. So I did that with Papa. By then he couldn't type because he had arthritis in his fingers. He was quite old already. So he would dictate it to me, then I would type it up, then I'd read it to him. So in this way we added a little bit. We reorganized. I did the initial editing from our side, and then we sent it to the publisher. They also did their editing, of course. And the person at the other end, the publisher, was very insistent that we have to give it two bookends in terms of time, because he said it's like a history of modern India, but not all of it. So that first title, from Partition to Operation Blue Star, comes from HarperCollins, from the publishers.
Okay.
And then they told us, if you want, you can give a subtitle. So I thought we must, because otherwise it's like a text, sounds like a textbook, very stodgy. So then we discussed it, and I said we must say tales or stories, because Papa was really a storyteller. He was such a raconteur, and
I
the
heard
book
about it.
is and the book is written in a very, very readable style. So I said tales. Then I said, how? What should I say? Should I say journalist? Should I say bureaucrat? My husband came up with the subtitle. He said, say tales of a journalist, bureaucrat, spy. So we said, okay. Papa also agreed. And the publisher said, yes, good. So that's how the title happened. And it's a fair title because gives you a glimpse of what to expect.
Fairly so. Fairly so.
Yeah. And as for the intent of the book, I would just like to read very few lines from the preface.
Please,
Let
please.
Papa tell you what the intent is. Yeah. So he says in the preface, this is not so much the story of my life as my view of the story of independent India. And later he says, I am an ordinary citizen of India who had the good fortune to live through the exhilarating birth of independent India in 1947 as a personal assistant to its first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru. At other times, I saw the seminal events that shaped modern India, both good and bad, as a journalist. One way or another, had a ringside view of partition and the related riots in Lahore, Multan, and Delhi, of the complex and delicate business of creating a cohesive and stable nation, of the invasion of Kashmir in 1947 and Kashmir's accession to India. So these are the things he pulled out to highlight. And then finally, the last line I want to read. Old men like me, he was 88 by the time he wrote the preface. So he says, old men like me tend to look back at their lives. Young people prefer to look forward. This is as it should be. But sometimes it is good for the young to understand what lies behind as well. So I have
That's so
written
wonderful.
this book. So I have
That's so.
written this book most of all for India's young men and women.
Yeah.
This he wrote in November 2012, 1 month before his passing from this life.
One.
So that
It's so
is the
wonderful.
intent.
So wonderful. He has written it so beautifully, and he's conveyed the entire intent behind it. And he had already the ringside view of those times of the corridors of power in the post-independent India, those shaped the modern India, good or
Hmm.
bad, both. But that's so wonderful and so interactive. I really love those lines. And as you said, it was also a kind of it was a regular jotting, regular diary writing, regular
Yes.
mama writing. It's not a recollection. It was a kind of a continuous writing and then editing and edit on
Yes.
many things in the book. So that's so fine.
And
That's so wonderful. Yeah, please,
sorry,
you're saying.
for some years he kept a very detailed diary. So some of the things are described in great detail. Uh, and then he had a phenomenal memory for old things, not for new things, but for old things also. And then he wrote several articles over the years. So we took the material from all of this to work into a book.
So that's so. So let's come to one part of one line of what you said. Let's talk about, because we all belong to Kashmir and this program is predominantly watched by the Kashmir. It's watched by everyone. It's an Indian program, but then again, it's for the world. It is a world view, and the Kashmiri diaspora across the globe are watching it. So
Hmm.
I would like to go back to now Taraji. Taraji seems to be a different word. That seems to be the hero of the Gadar movie. Is known as Tara. I'd like to say, Tara, would you like to elucidate about, because I have heard that two chapters of this book are dedicated to the accession into this, what do you call it, Kabali raid, the raid and the rights and all, and then again accession. There are two wonderful things, two complementary things to each other. So, would you like to elucidate and expand this one-liner into the scenic beauty, how your father has composed this entire thing, entire gambit? Because this belongs to our history, Kashmir.
You want me? No, Pamposh is going to deal with the accession because
It
she's the
doesn't
one
matter. It doesn't
focused on it.
matter. It's okay. It's okay.
But
Papoji, please, please, please.
Okay, sure. So I'm just going to take half a minute to go through the main events that led up to accession. Even though most of us know this, but I'm just going to take a little time. So when the British left India, they handed over power to 565 princely states,
Three states,
and
yes.
one of those was Kashmir. They did not hand over power to an Indian government totally. And so after independence, and even before independence, because they knew what was coming, Nehru and Sardar Patel had to actually negotiate with all these princely states to bring them into the Indian Union. And a few held out, including Kashmir and Hyderabad, for example. Uh, and so moving to Kashmir, I think the first thing that happened perhaps was on 14th August 1947, basically at the time of independence, a standstill agreement was announced in Kashmir. So this is an agreement between the
Pakistan and India.
Maharaja and Pakistan. Yeah, not India,
Yeah, Pakistan
because
and Maharashtra.
remember
Yeah.
Kashmir is still independent. So between the Maharaja and Pakistan, Jinnah or whoever. So this agreement basically was to protect Kashmir from any attack from Pakistan, so that Kashmir could continue to be an independent state.
Right.
But within a week, on 22nd October, there was an attack by what is called in Kashmir the KOUL attack, an attack by tribesmen from Northwest Frontier and so on, which was clearly backed by the Pakistani military and planned by the Pakistani military. But the front men were these tribals, so that's why it's called the KOUL attack. That was 22nd October. And people started, figuring out what to do. The attack was terrible. There is, Papa has included an eyewitness account by a gentleman called P.N. Vanchu, and it's just awful. If you read it, it's terrible. It was awful.
Okay.
People were being killed, and women were violated, and so on. But the Maharaja sent his forces to fight them, and things still carried on. On 25th October, there were the Sera celebrations in the palace in Srinagar. It was called Shergai, I believe.
Shergadi.
Yeah, Shergadi, sorry. And while the celebrations were going on, the power was cut all over the valley because there was only one power station at Mahura, and the Kabel
Captured.
raided
They had
that.
captured this province. Yeah.
Yeah. So at midnight, apparently, the Maharaja sent a message to Delhi saying, I want to accede, I need troops, so I will accede to India. And the next day, VP Menon, who
VP
was
Menon comes.
secretary,
Yeah. No.
yeah, he went to Kashmir. The instrument of accession was signed. VP Menon went back the same day, and Mountbatten, as Governor General, accepted the accession the following day on 27th October. 28th October, troops were sent from Delhi. So this is the background, which we all know, but I just thought I'll quickly go through it. And also, on the night of 27th and 28th October, the Maharaja left for Jammu. He left Srinagar for Jammu. Now, of course, Nehru was in Delhi. So was Sheikh Abdullah, because Sheikh Abdullah was in trouble in Kashmir. So he was actually in Delhi at that time. And he was very, very keen to go immediately to Kashmir as soon as the accession had been signed. He pushed for the accession to be accepted. And so there is a passage in the book about Sheikh Abdullah rushing to the airport so he could fly to Srinagar. And my father was asked to go with him. Nehru had another personal assistant who advised him on political affairs, Mr. Kachru, Dwarkanath Kachru. He phoned my father and said, come with us. So they went to the airport, and there's quite a dramatic scene described in the book where Sheikh Abdullah is telling the driver to go faster and faster, and Papa's thinking they are going to die
Wanted to reach
in a
Srinagar.
crash. Yeah. But by the time they reached Palam airport, that time that was the only airport, it was, I think, too dark. There wasn't enough light. So they had to go back. And so they all went back to Nehru's residence, where they set up like a war room to get updates. Bakshi Ghulam Muhammad, by the way, by then was in Srinagar. Bakshi Ghulam Muhammad, who
He
later
was
became Prime
managing.
Minister of Kashmir. he was managing there. So Papa has written about what he was doing as well. He collected what Papa calls a ragtag militia, and he called it the Kashmir militia, and they defended Kashmir until the troops could reach the next day, on the 28th of October.
They
And they
made a
defended
militia,
Kashmir,
Kashmir militia.
yeah, but they were armed with hockey sticks and poles and just a few rifles which they got from shikaris. So very interesting. This passage I found very interesting. So Bakshi Muhammad told these people, these volunteers, he said, "You go and man all the bridges in Srinagar and make a lot of noise. You shout slogans, fire in the air if you have a gun, and make the Kabyle think that there's a big force here." So that's what they did until the troops arrived. Then, of course, the troops secured Srinagar airport and so on. And so Papa has written about that too. He later, in December, he was sent by All India Radio to cover the fighting, which was almost over by then. But he's written about the Kashmir militia, he's written about Sheikh Abdullah wanting to go there, and he's written about the bravery of a few people in particular. There was one person that the Maharaja had sent, the head of the Maharaja's army, in the first instance, before Indian troops arrived, General Rajinder Singh, who was killed in the fighting, he was martyred.
Brigadier
And
Rajinder.
then, yeah, and then in the Indian Army, there was at that time he was Lieutenant Colonel Ranjit Rai. So these two people he has mentioned for their bravery. They both gave their lives for Kashmir. And later on, Papa has also described the fighting that happened, that the troops did. And some of that was very imaginative as well. So there was some fighting near Zojila Pass, which I think is about 11,000 feet. And the army could not take their tanks there. So they dismantled the tanks and took them on mules and ponies and then assembled them again and went into battle. So a lot of these things which I didn't know about. So it's not only the young who need to know, some of us older people also don't know these, how people fought for Kashmir actually at that time. Um, and I think that's what it was. These are the people who saved Kashmir in a way.
Yes, I think that is how it is in Kashmir, and all these aspects were there, and all these stories are already making the rounds across the country. So, adding on to Som Nath Dhar, your father's perspective is very because he had a ringside view and he was
Mm,
insider. He could look at from the curtain, and there is an opinion, public opinion, which was sometimes official, and which is not
mm,
exactly the same what has actually happened. So that's
mm,
why I was very much interested to know about Dar Saab's his perspective about this. We have read all these things, especially Larry Collins and Dominic Labs, The Freedom at Midnight, that I have written when I was in teens, and he has
mm,
explained everything from partition to the Gandhi, and
mm,
they were very wonderful duo writers. And accession we all know about, but then what he has said, and he has added on certain things
mm,
on behalf of Bakshi and other things as well. So let's slightly think about one more aspect of this debate, that is
mm,
about the partition, because he was a very young lad when he saw
mm,
the partition.
mm.
So how has he reported? How has he calligraphed the memories of the partition as a reporter, as a young man in his book?
Mm,
Tara has already explained a bit about it, but you can
mm.
just add on something which is left out.
So he moved to Delhi in May, as I said. But before that, the fighting, the riots had already started. So when he was in Lahore, he's written a little bit about that. Not that much yet, not so much violence yet, but how they were living in a colony called Krishna Nagar, which was Hindu
Okay.
dominated, Hindu and Sikh, I think, and how they tried to protect themselves and all that. But then, as a reporter, as a correspondent, he was sent to Multan. And there's a very, very sad and very touching description of what he found in Multan when he got there. because a lot of people had already been killed. Some women had jumped into a well, and all of that. He's described there was an old woman who was wandering around, and in Punjabi, she said to him, Menu sang, I forgot the word, Menu Sankhya Lade, which apparently means bring me some arsenic. She had no
Okay.
will to live at all. Her whole family had died. So it's very poignant. It's very sad. Then he moved to Delhi and he saw the carnage in Delhi on the other side as well. So he's described a scene where there were a whole lot of bodies, and the whole area was smelling of obviously decaying bodies. There was a lot of looting as well, but the killing especially is very, very sad. He was living with his sister and brother-in-law, the Bamzais. At that time he was working for Nehru. He was living with them by then, and they had two servants who disappeared, and they never found out what happened to them. So a lot of very sad. There are a few lighter moments also in the midst of all this sadness, but on the whole, very sad. Yeah. And I think that made a very, very great and lasting impression on my father's mind, because till the end of his life, he always said, this should never happen again. We must never go down that road again. He always said that to me. It's not in the book, but he always said that when you talk to him, that we must never allow this history to repeat itself in any form. So, and he was always very upset when there were any kind of riots anywhere in the country. But that's, yeah. Actually, he didn't talk about it at home so much, at least not to me, maybe to Tara. Uh, when I was young, I didn't know any of this, what he had been through and what he had seen, because he didn't dwell on the negative. But then it did leave that lasting impression on him. When he was 85, he was, as Tara said, I think he was very forward looking. So he started a blog and he tried to start a peace forum. It didn't really take off. But on his blog, he said, let us start a peace forum, those who want peace, and just to spread more peace and less bigotry and less prejudice in our country and in the world. So he was very, very affected by the violence that he witnessed.
It has affected so many writers and intellectuals of those
Mm,
times.
mm,
And it was really a very hurricane and a horrendous thing which happened to this country. And all our problems started after that. We had many, many people, Amrita Pritam, many, many stories about. But I would like to say it's a very sad affair. But because he was himself part of it and he was himself a reporter and he also suffered. So naturally, his narrative was something which was very unique. I wanted to listen about it. One more thing I want to ask now is all about his stint with Panditji. Now, let's come to the Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of independent India. And your father stayed with Panditji. And there are a number of anecdotes how he saw Panditji, what was Panditji's character, personality, daily work, daily routine, interaction. Let's talk about Panditji first, then we'll talk about others. Tara will speak about it. So I'll put myself on mute and Tara will speak about it.
I'm okay. I was muted, so I was trying to point that out to you. Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to share a little bit about that because we had decided between us she would cover the accession and I would say a little bit about his stint with Pandit Nehru. But of course, Pamposh has made my life easier on that front too to begin with because she's already said that he left Lahore, came there. He actually came to Delhi on one of the later trains, and he came to Delhi because his only sister and brother-in-law, who were like his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Bamzai, were living in Delhi in a nice big spacious house with a garden. So they said come there. So he arrived, and the very next day he was he went for a job interview. He just got ready, freshened up, and went for a job interview to become a private assistant to Pandit Nehru. So this was May 47. Of course, this was before independence, a few months. But so he saw things from actually the ringside seat, as far as, like Panditji was very involved, and of course he was already sort of heading the interim cabinet. And then he went on to, very soon, within months, when India became independent, he became the first prime minister, and Papa was still working for him then. So he met a lot of people who would come visit Panditji. He would see him involved with so many pressing problems, including those of the refugees. And it really gave him a great perspective. He already, I think, had a very positive image of Pandit Nehru, because he had gone to jail for so many years, and so many times over, standing up against the colonialists and all that, the colonial masters. But now he was just seeing him, the way he worked, the kind of man that came through, and I think that had a very big impact on him. And I remember when I was a child, this was one of the things he used to always say: if I have a third person I would like you to know more about, it's Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Not just that he dealt with so many problems and actually gave a sense of direction to how India would develop, because he was very firm that it must be multicultural, it must be inclusive, it must not exclude any part of, of the new country at all. No people in it, no Indians should be excluded based on anything, their caste or this or that or whatever. So yeah, so he kind of saw him every day and worked for him from early May 47. So he was basically, he went for the job interview and he was told at the end of the day, yes, you're hired, you start working. So he started working for Pandit Nehru from his home office, which was, those days, was 17 York Road, and then it shifted to Teen Murti Marg quite a bit later on. And he worked with him till September 47, when he got a chance to go back to journalism with All India Radio. So I just wanted to focus on a few incidents, a few episodes that highlight. In fact, they have some of them have a light side to them. One is a short one, but Papa is there in the office and the phone rings. So he's, whatever he's doing, I think he's doing a press briefing or something, and he goes, picks up the phone, and the caller says, "I'm Nehru. I want," and Papa butts in. He says, "Nehru who? There are so many people who call this number and claim to be Nehru." So he says, suddenly there was laughter on the other end. And the caller says, "Young man, I'm Jawaharlal Nehru. Please call Hari." Hari was his helper, his kind of, major domo. So Papa was kind of very embarrassed and all, but Pandit Nehru said, "Never mind, it's okay. You were just trying to do your job, so it's fine." There were a few times, he says, when he lost his temper. I don't want to go into details of one time when Papa was trying to connect him to Sir Girija Shankar Bajpayee about something very important. This was just after India had become independent. And then, they lost the line because Papa was trying to give him a private line. He knew this would be a very important call. But Panditji came out to the reception room and the line had disappeared from here. So he said, "What do you mean you lost the call and all that?" But later, Papa explained why, because he said, "Then I stood guard because you were trying to talk from the reception room. I stood guard at the door so no one would come in." So he said, "Thank you very much." So he said he had a quick temper, but he was very kind and he understood other people and accepted things very easily. This was just a, very young 22-year-old assistant of his, but still, and he treated him with respect.
I heard that I heard that Pandit used to live without any security at York Road,
Oh,
and
yes.
anybody could walk in.
Yes, in fact, his, the top PS he had was Mathai. And unfortunately, Papa didn't get on well with him. So that's one reason he actually took up the All India Radio offer, but basically to go back to journalism also. But one time, this was after Panditji had just become prime minister, I would guess. I can't remember now. But one day, Panditji had gone to the South Block to his office. Can't remember whether it was before 15th August 47 or after. He came back and Mathai had arranged for a posse of policemen to guard the house because there were people just walking into Panditji's house. refugees and people with arms and things like that. And Panditji would say, "No, sabko ghar andar bhej dijiye." So Mathai thought this we need this much security, but Pandit Nehru was so upset. He said, "No, you send them back. I do not want them. I don't want any barriers between me and the people." So they had to be exiled to the servants' quarters and told, "Don't show your face anywhere in the house
I
area."
also heard Panditji was very particular about the view of great editors of Hindustan Times, Amrit Bazar Patrika, because your father was briefing him on the press every night evening. So Panditji was very particular about the view of the this institutions, especially the
Hmm.
newspapers and the great editors of those times.
Hmm.
That is
So,
true.
Papa used to do a daily digest
Daily Dad.
of editorial opinions and so on. And he's written that Panditji was particularly interested in whatever Chelapati Rao had to say. He was editor of National Herald, and Lala Durga Das, Hindustan Times, and Tarun Kanti Ghosh from the Amrita Bazar Patrika. And he also wanted to know what was in the
Ghosh.
unsigned editorials of the Hindu and the Tribune. So every day he wanted to know what these editors were saying. He was generally very open to other people's opinions, it seems, from the book. When I read the book, also with his own people in his own party and parliamentarians, he always listened to everybody, all voices. That's what Papa has written.
I I just want to come down to another aspect of Pandit ji. It is being said that Sheikh Saab, when he was arrested in, because there's a mention in the book. Why I'm quoting this, there are a
Hmm.
number of stories about this episode, and all great people have written about it. But I'm
Hmm.
simply mentioning it just because of one reason, because your father has mentioned it in the book.
Hmm.
So it is said that against the normal general opinion, that Sheikh Shah was arrested in 1953 on behest of Nehruji, while on the ground the reality was different because it was the Mr. Kidwai and Mr. Abdul Kalam Azad ji who were against Nehru at that point of time because of whatever the reason, and also his cabinet was the rebel cabinet which was headed by Bakshi Ghulam Muhammad. Could you please illustrate something about it?
Actually, I wouldn't say it was at Nehru's behest. What Papa has written is that Nehru must have given the nod to it, however reluctantly. It seems it was initiated by some of Sheikh Saab's own ministers, Bakshi Ghulam Muhammad, maybe also DP Dhar Saab, because he was a minister then, I'm not sure. And it is true that Kidwai and Abdul Kalam Azad also thought that Sheikh Saab has somehow gone off track in some way. So it was Nehru very, very reluctantly actually agreed, it seems. But because everybody was advising him to do that, he did agree. But they remained friends. And even when Sheikh Saab was in prison, Nehru, apparently, even when his sons, Farooq Abdullah, and I don't know who else, the other one, whenever they used to travel back to Delhi, from abroad, Nehru would send a car to pick them up. So they remained friends. And when Nehru died, Sheikh Abdullah was one of the pallbearers. So they stayed friends on the personal level, but politically there were divisions, and there were a lot of people both in Kashmir and in Delhi advising that he needs to be removed. And then he was arrested in Kashmir. So I don't know how much Nehru had to do with the arrest, but what Papa has written is that Bakshi Saab would not have taken that step without Nehru's nod, agreement at least. Tara
Because he
wants
was
to
a
say.
Democrat, probably he thought the majority thought, and
Yes,
that's
exactly. He was very
acceptable.
democratic. Yeah.
Yes, Tara, you want to say something?
I just wanted to add a little bit to that because, Papa again has a personal experience that he connects with this. So I think basically my understanding from Papa was that the initial thing was that Bakshi Saab, who was the deputy prime minister, they were all prime minister, deputy prime minister of J&K, he was in Abdullah's Sheikh Abdullah was the prime minister. He was the deputy prime minister, and he and some of the other ministers, he conveyed this maybe to KN Bamzai, saying that basically they had lost faith in Abdullah, and and also in at the center, as you rightly mentioned, of course there were some people, including Maulana Azad and Rafi Ahmad Kidwai especially, who said no, this is not going to work. So Pandit ji was still kind of finding it hard to decide. And then one night Papa writes that late at night, he used to call him Bhai ji, Bade Papa, that is Ken Bamsai, called him and said, "Come with me. We have to go and deliver a personal letter for Mr. Nehru from Bakshi." So they left immediately. Papa also left. They went together. By the time they reached Pandit Nehru's residence, Teen Murti House, by this time, it was 1:30 a.m., but they found his study light on. So they asked Mathai, who was to sleep in the same house, they said, we have to meet him because it's very urgent. And so, yeah, so you're muted, unfortunately, Jugal. So,
I
uh,
did it. I did it deliberately to
oh,
create
okay.
noise.
Okay. So,
Mathai was his assistant. He was his assistant and typing and other things. Jawaharlal Nehru's assistant, Mathai.
yes, yes, that's the one who stayed on, the one Papa had
Who
problems
stayed
with.
at with Indira Gandhi, then wrote very nasty book about it. Yeah, that's a
Anyway,
different story.
that's one
Yeah.
reason Papa left and joined AIR. But anyway, so they were ushered in immediately to Pandit Nehru, and Bade Papa Ken Bamzai gave him the letter. He said, "This is
I
the
think we need
letter."
to be quicker because we have to cover a lot many things yet.
Started
Yeah.
saying that, and within a few days of that, meanwhile, with Rafi Ahmad Kidwai also persuading Panditji, because as you said, he was a Democrat. So he felt like if his colleagues were giving him advice, he must take it. Soon after that, he was arrested in Gulbarg. Sheikh Abdullah.
As per as per you, as per you, what would be the most two mistakes of Pandit Nehruji, as explained by your father? Because we all know about those mistakes, but I want to really know it through your experience and your reading the book. And what were those two mistakes which your father mentioned?
Well, I think everybody probably by now feels this way. The first one was going to the UN because that really internationalized the whole situation. And also, Papa was in Srinagar, in Kashmir, in December 1947, and he's written that the army commanders had beaten back the Kabul and whoever was supporting them to what we now accept as the line of control or the border. But they said they could beat them back even to Muzaffarabad, and reclaim all the area that they had captured. But then, maybe under pressure from Mountbatten to some extent, Nehru decided to go to the UN. And Papa thinks that he probably thought India's case was very clear and the UN would support the Indian position because the accession was legal. It was supported by the leader of the largest party in Kashmir, that's Sheikh Abdullah.
And
So,
the king itself, king, because as per the this what you call is dismantling of the what you call it British that agreement with the princely states.
hmm,
It was supportive to that because Prince had
exactly.
already done it with the India, yeah, government of India.
Exactly, exactly. So that's probably why he went to the UN. And again, he was very principled and he believed probably in the UN and a unilateral agency. But what Papa feels is that certain things had started to shift in the world by then. Not quite, but the Cold War was about to start. It was coming on already. And then in the 50s, Pakistan became part of that CATO. So they aligned with uh, the West, and India went more towards the USSR. So it was maybe what today we might call realpolitik rather than principles. Well, that would be the Indian view. So that was, in hindsight, it was a big mistake. At that time, perhaps it could not be foreseen, but it turned out to be a mistake. And the second, according to Papa, was accepting Bakshi Ghulam Muhammad's resignation,
Resignation.
I think in 1963.
As per Kamraj plan, yeah.
Yes, as per the Kamraj plan, exactly. The thing is that Bakshi Ghulam Muhammad was, of course, not Congress party. He was National Conference.
He
So
was
he
national.
was not required to submit his resignation as part of the Kamraj plan. He was perhaps just being polite. And Nehru accepted his resignation probably because there were allegations of corruption.
Corruption
But what
against him.
but what Papa says is that corruption didn't die down even after that. And then the next, uh, I think by then it was chief minister, was a non-entity who didn't do anything much for Kashmir. And Bakshi Saab had been very good for Kashmir. He brought education.
He was a
He
great
built the
nationalist, great
tunnel, and he
pro-people
was,
personality.
yeah, and he was totally in favor of the Indian Union. He
Yeah.
used to apparently end his speeches by saying Jai Hind.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I
he was a
mean,
great man.
you can't be more
And
Indian than that.
people still remember him a lot. Uh, there is one more thing I want to know now. I mean, we can just slightly pedal fast.
Hmm.
Uh, I want to know about this. What happened on that particular invitation when Panditji had to be invited to the Bamjay Saab's place, and Panditji's sister, she asked your
Tara.
father to go to the TN call, the great ambassador who could outwit the Henry Kissinger of his times. I mean, such a brilliant man, TN call, and he went there and he saw your mother, and I don't know what happened. Then they got married. Tell us something about this whole in the light
Tara will,
rain.
Tara will talk about that. Tara, unmute yourself.
Uh, no,
I've
yeah,
done that.
thank you. Yeah, I was keen to talk a little bit about it because we had discussed it earlier, and I was saying, let me cover a few incidents connected with Pandit Nehru. This was at the time when Papa was still working for Pandit Nehru, because this is now very early August. So Pandit Nehru was who he was working for, that was his boss. And the Kashmiris of Delhi decided to invite Pandit Nehru to a sort of informal Biradri dinner. And as he accepted the invitation, all the preparations started. And the Kashmiris, when they invited him, they said the venue of the dinner is going to be K.N. Bamlai's house. Of course, it was a large house and all, but I think they knew his association, that he knew Panditji well. Bade Papa used to go visit Panditji a number of times. So anyway, and then of course Papa was living with the Bamzais. So as the host, brother-in-law of the host, he was roped in to help with the preparations. And one of the jobs that fell to his portion was to invite the guests each guest by making a personal call. So he calls TN Call's house. This was one of the guests who was to be invited. Papa didn't know him personally, but he had met him a few times when he came to visit Pandit Nehru or Vijay Lakshmi Pandit. So, of course, because he was his assistant. So Papa calls TN Call's house, and his sister Indira picks up the phone. Of course, Papa doesn't know her at that time, but he writes when reporting this incident in the book that he says, I had no idea that about 5 or 6 months after that, I would be introduced to her, and, we would want to marry each other. And just a year from this dinner, they would be married to each other. And he says she was my partner for life once they were married. They were very close to each other. I mean, this continued right through their lives. So at that time, she was just a voice he heard on the phone. But a few months later, they would be introduced to each other and they would meet. And so the dinner happened. It was an informal dinner, and they all sat down on a carpeted floor. Kashmiri food was served. And then when they were ready to eat, Pandit Nehru turned towards Tiki Mamu, and I mean, not my Mamu, of course, not Papa's relative at that time, to Tian Call and said, Tiki, my katori has got 20, my thali has got 20 katoris in it. How many are in yours? So apparently, Tian Call said to him, mine also has 20. So then Nehruji was satisfied that everyone was getting the same kind of food, and they started the dinner. And Papa was amazed to see him because he used to see him at work every day, very busy, dealing with so many pressing problems. And independence was just coming. And he could put that all away and just be a charming guest with the Kashmiri community. So nice side of Pandit Nehru.
That's a great thing. Great stories, great anecdotes, beautiful ones. Yeah, actually, I really want to ask. Your father was a keen witness of the parliamentary proceedings, you know, and I think let's know all about these great personalities like Dr. Shama Prasad Mukherjee, B.R. Ambedkar, and all these great people, Morarji Desai, whom he has seen during these proceedings. How did they talk? What was their impressionate? What was the content? How forceful was their content? And how wonderful, how great, or how big they were from the point of view of a young journalist in those times, post-partition times.
Yeah, so Papa covered Parliament for All India Radio, and so he's written a little bit about how they were great orators back then, and people would listen in pin drop silence when they spoke, rose to spoke. I think also people were more polite back then. They listened to all views, but also they were really good orators. And he's written specifically about a few, just a few, their styles. So Dr. Shama Prasad Mukherjee, he said, always spoke with emotion and sentiment, and Dr. Ambedkar used logic and argument, so more from the mind. Nehru was Nehru. He spoke mostly extempore, and of course, he was very inspiring. We all know that. He was great with his talking. He was very calm in parliament most of the time, but once he lost his temper, that also Papa has written, when they were debating foreign food aid from the US, and the communist parties said maybe there will be strings attached. So apparently, Nehru really lost his cool and he stood up and he said, I'm not just the prime minister, I'm Nehru, I'm Indian, something like that. And I will never compromise the sovereignty of India for aid, whatever happens. Even if we are starving, we are not going to compromise our sovereignty. So, this is sort of what he's written about the quality of what should one call it, the speakers and the level of the debate in parliament.
Level of the debate and the
Yeah.
quality and
Yeah.
eloquence and the depth of the debates.
Yes. Yes.
That's so wonderful. I mean, watching those great personalities, and he has also jotted it down in his memoirs.
Mhm. Mm.
Uh, I would like to say now one of the most important aspect, probably that is another pillar of the title of your book, of the book by your father, and he has talked about this. We all know about this Gungi Gudia story.
Mm.
Indira Gandhi her rise to the power. We know also it was a Kamraj plan once again,
Mm. Mm.
and then her fall from the stature, then again rising to the patriarchy of the Indian
Mm.
politics.
Mm.
Tell us about how has he explained, how has he hobnobbed, how has he crisscrossed through this entire
Mm.
personality and our time space on the political landscape of India in a
Actually, he's
different way,
yeah,
because
he's so.
we have seen people like Jacob, people like Maktuli, people like
Mm.
Shekhar Gupta, people like Prabhu Rai. Many have reported about Operation Blue Star. Even Brar himself, and before that they have talked about Sanjay Gandhi, and even Menka has made some great interviews about the Sanjay Gandhi and Indira's times and all that. But I'm really interested to know your father's point of view, how he has jotted it down in his memoir. Yeah.
Actually, he's written in some detail about her rise to power, not that much about the rest because by then he was out of India. He's still written, he was, as a journalist, he was very much against the emergency from day one. Even when the rest of us, even within the family, we were like, well, let's wait and see how it plans out. He's like, no, you cannot have democracy and censorship. So he was very much against that.
All
But
the
the,
five great Kashmiris, they were all, P.N. Aksar was against it. P.N. Aksar
mm,
was against it. Even D.P. Dar had suggested against it. Even P.N. Dar had told against it. But they were all Kashmiri lobby, which was
yes,
Panj Pandav. Panj Pandav was against this emergency formula. Yeah. Even General
sometimes.
Rana was against it. General Rana was the chief of the army
Oh,
staff. He was
really?
against.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Sometimes they were called Indira Gandhi's kitchen cabinet also. Although it just happened. It wasn't, nobody said, let's get Kashmiri Pandits in here. They just happened to be Kashmiris who were in
No,
those
I mean
positions.
they were there because of their intelligence, their
Exactly.
brilliance. Their
Exactly. The
insight,
track record. Yeah,
they were the
exactly.
brilliant, most brilliant geniuses of the modern India, pro
Yeah,
country, pro nation. They are the architects of this nation. They were not just there because they were Kashmiri Pandits and some
exactly.
kind of a red tapeism was there. Indra thought that they are my own men. Yeah,
No, no,
please.
not at all. And she was actually brought up in UP, let's be honest.
Uh,
I mean, she was ethnic Kashmiri, but she was born
yeah,
outside
yeah.
Kashmir. But anyway, so I will just say a few words. I can't go into all the detail. So the whole Gungi Gudiya thing, as you already mentioned, is quite well known. That was again Kamraj's great plan to
Kamaraj
kind
was the
of
masterman. He was a
yes,
great
yes,
man of Indian
yes,
politics.
puppeteer. But how she outmaneuvered him and all of the old guard. At that time, it was called the syndicate. Later on, it
Syndicate.
came to be known as the old guard. So that is actually quite fascinating. I'm sure others have also written about it, but it's still very interesting, and he's written it very well because he writes in that journalistic style.
Yeah, yeah,
But
he has a very wonderful
yeah,
writing. I heard about it. Some person from the University of Singapore has written a review on your father's book, Mr. Singh,
hmm.
and he has
Oh,
written it. Yeah,
Kirpal, yes, Kirpal Singh,
yeah, he
yes,
has talked about his style of writing, so
yes.
lucid and yeah. Please,
Yes, yes, yes. So basically, yeah, that part is really interesting how she stood up for herself, how she outmaneuvered him. She got support from some very senior politicians like Jagjeevan Ram, Sanjeeva Reddy, and from different parts of India, Fakhruddin Ali Ahmed, who was from Assam, and also Dr. Karan Singh. These people supported her. And then she set up
Yuvraj.
also. Yes, yes, Yuvraj Karan Singh. Then she also set up a think tank, which incidentally had some of the Kashmiris in it as well, including our uncle T.N. Kaul, I think, and
Vicky
Haksar
Bhai.
Sahab, Tiki Bai, P.N. Haksar. I think DP Dhar also might have been part of it. And Haksar, according to Papa, was very, very fine, very clever tactician, and he advised her a lot. So he helped her to gain that upper hand. And Papa also writes that Indira Gandhi was really all about power, and she performed best with her back to the wall. Even otherwise, even later on. So if you look at Bangladesh, how she dealt with that and all that. So that's quite interesting. In fact, he worked with most of all with Nehru, but he also worked with Indira Gandhi, especially when he was director of news at All India Radio, and
And
briefly with Rajiv Gandhi also. So at the end of the book, he
Bangladesh,
wrote in a good
Bangladesh
comparison.
is also owned by. I mean, RN Cow has done a lot much work.
Yes, yes,
RN
yes,
Cow, another Kashmiri, and DP there was there, and then
yes,
Manik Shah. I mean, all these great people, great sons of India have done a lot of work there along with him.
yes,
It was
yes,
not only
yes,
Mrs. Gandhi, it was the cabinet, the advisors, the
yes,
people.
yes. But
Yeah.
she was the one who went ahead,
She
right?
was the
She was the
leader. She
leader.
had to take a
Yeah.
decision. Yeah.
And
You were saying
also, I think that
something?
when Kamaraj helped her to rise to power, by the way, Kamaraj set up a meeting with 14 chief ministers, and Ghulam Muhammad Sadiq of Kashmir proposed
Sadi
Indira
Sadi.
Gandhi as prime minister, and everybody said yes. So Kashmiris always have something to do with whatever's
They
happening.
appear from somewhere. They appear from suddenly from somewhere, do their role, and
Yes,
then
yes,
vanish into
yes,
blue. That's
yes.
true about Kashmiris.
Yes, yes. So quite interesting. And then, of course, the bank nationalization and privy
Yeah, but
purses,
she
all
did
that.
many
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
She had her follies also because she was then, I mean, the coterie. Then Sanjay came in. Other things, there are a lot many things which are
Yes, of
on and
course.
on.
The emergency was a
But
whole
I
other
was
story.
interested how your father saw her, and you very well illustratedly explained about it.
Yeah.
So let's, yeah, yeah. So let's move a bit further,
Hmm.
and let's talk about your father as a diplomat, as an ambassador
Okay.
to the Austria and Kenya,
He was an
because you were
ambassador.
there. Eh? He was
He
a
was
diplomat.
an ambassador. He was
He
first
was.
secretary because he
Okay.
was already working for RNAW, in
Okay. It
covert
was a
operations.
covert
So they
operation for intelligence.
covert
Okay.
operations. So they don't usually become ambassadors. They're at the next level. So he was first secretary both in Nairobi and in Vienna.
Okay.
And this is simultaneous. the work for Raw and diplomacy, because
They were diplomacy.
he was a diplomat, but he was also an undercover agent, if you like. But of course, it's not like James Bond. So
It's not like
you know, for my father, I think intelligence work was not that different from journalism. It was about gathering information, making contacts, which he did very easily. He was, as Tara said, he was an extreme extrovert. He would make friends with everybody. When I was a small child in Delhi, he was friends with millionaires, and he was also very good friends with a mochi who used to sit outside Bengali market.
oh,
So he just made friends with anyone, all ages, all stations in life. So that, I think, must have helped him a great deal when he worked for RAW. He was posted in Kenya and Austria. And actually, in Kenya, there was an operation which was a little bit, which is written about, which was a little bit spy like, like we expect.
you were with him
I
that
was
time.
with him. Yes,
Okay.
yes. But of course, he didn't tell me at that moment. I only came to know later. But Bangladesh had just been liberated. And there were, I think, two men working in the Pakistani embassy in Nairobi, in Kenya, who were Bengalis, at
Oh,
that time known as East Pakistanis.
East
And they
Pakistan.
wanted to, yeah. So they said, they got in touch with Papa and they said, we want to go to Dhaka. We don't want to work for the government of Pakistan anymore.
Oh,
But our colleagues, they all lived in a compound. So all the embassy staff lived in the same area. And they said, we are being watched day and night. They don't let us out of their sight. And when we go, we want to take all our luggage. So first Papa said, just go without your luggage, it'll be easier. They said, no, we have to take all our things. We don't want to go as refugees. So then there was a Bengali gentleman in the Indian High Commission who was very good friends with my father. So Papa persuaded him to go there. So there was a dinner for the three Bengalis, two from Pakistani embassy, one from Indian High Commission, but they're all Bengalis, so it's just social. And then I think one of them pretended to be completely drunk. He wasn't drunk, he just pretended. So the
oh,
other one was like trying to help him. Oh, you're drunk, we walk straight. While all the others loaded all the luggage into the Indian Bengalis station wagon. So they took
oh.
the luggage out that night when he drove out of there. And then all of them quietly, one by one, next day left the compound and went straight to the airport. So that was a bit of an operation which was quite interesting.
You were.
But the rest was mainly just gathering information, that. There was some, even in Vienna, there was some incidents like that where he would go and talk to people, pretend to be somebody else sometimes. So once he went and he said, my name is Kashmira or something, Kashmira Singh,
I
somewhere.
mean, in those times, as a student leader, I remember the espionage people, the CID people were quite recognizable. Everybody knew that Falana is CID is moving around.
There
Those were very-
was there were people in the know, but it was not that well known at that time, I think. But there were some instances where people changed their names. So my father was also asked to change his name. He said, "No, I've taken bylines as a journalist and all. Now I can't suddenly become somebody else." Because
oh,
some of the people who changed their names then had very embarrassing situations. Somebody from the earlier times would meet them and recognize them and all that. So Papa said, no, I'm not going to change my name. Anyway, but in Vienna, what is it called? The International Atomic Energy Agency is based in Vienna. So a lot of his work was about nuclear secrets,
oh.
Pakistan getting those technology and all that.
So he was
So he
working for the
did get
country
that.
in a
Yeah.
great way.
Yeah,
uh,
I got that information.
but I've heard that as a journalist, he was also a reporter. He has also covered assassination of Gandhi. We have read lot many literature about
Mm,
Gandhiji's assassination, especially Daddy
mm.
Collins and Dominic Clapper, whom I held in very high esteem always because their research was always flawless. I mean, their all chapters are beautiful. They've explained it in a very way. What has your father, has he explained something about assassination of Gandhiji in the book?
Yes. Tara, would you like to talk about that? Unmute yourself.
I can't unmute myself. Can you unmute? Ah, thank you. Thank you. I'm not able to do it from my end. I don't know. It goes into another mode. So yeah, I will try to be brief because I realize we're getting close to time, and I was the one who was so sick and saying I won't be able to sit through it all. But I think the important
You are
thing is
no more sick anymore. You are not sick anymore.
there's so much. And Pamposh is doing all the donkey's work. So I'm enjoying listening to her also, really remembering Papa. But to come back to this, what I want to focus is the coverage of the thing from, from the AIR newsroom. And All India Radio was it those days. There was only radio, there was no television. And All India Radio would beam in bulletins in different languages all over India. It was listened to all over India. So anyway, so it's 6 p.m. and he says the newsroom was buzzing. The people were, typewriters were clicking away and the teleprinters were busily sort of buzzing away and all that. And there was a lot of noise going on because they were preparing for the night's bulletins in all the various languages. Suddenly, says this news flash came that Mahatma Gandhi has been shot at thrice and the worst is feared. And he says, after a moment of shock, the editor in charge at that time, he yelled the news out above the din so everyone could hear it. And Papa says that everything came to a stop. There was pin drop silence. They were so stunned. He said we were all so stunned that nobody even, we couldn't grasp what had happened and we didn't know how to react. And, it's like, he says people were thinking, how could this happen to the apostle of peace and nonviolence? That he maybe has met his end already and it's a violent end. But he says after a few moments, the journalistic training kicked in. And of course, the director of news was informed, and then he tried to call and find out the latest and all that. Couldn't get anything. There was a lot of confusion. Then within minutes, the AIR correspondent who was covering the prayer meeting anyway, he called and said he's dead. And one seasoned journalist just said, okay, I'm going to start writing the obituary, things like that. The director of news, when he heard this, he talked to this journalist who was calling from Birla House. He said, okay, you stay there. I'm coming in my car. So he took a car and went straight off to try and get to Birla House. But the news had spread like wildfire. So as soon as he reached any road or bylane even close to Birla House, it was impossible to go in a vehicle. So he turned back, went back to AIR, and by then BBC had already announced the news. So it was even worse around Birla House. And they also got permission to announce the news because the assassin had been identified by that time. So All India Radio also put out the news and everything. And then Papa was one of the 3 people picked out by the director of news, though he was very junior. The other 2 were very senior, Melville de Mello and an ICS man, L.K. Jha, that they would go and cover the early morning time, and then the first part of the funeral cortege, really. So these 3 decided to meet at 4 a.m. so they could reach Birla House at 5 a.m. And they set off from the broadcasting house, from their office. It was impossible. As they got close to Birla House, there was a Jawan with a rifle standing there. And he said, no, you don't have a pass from the DC, from the district commissioner. My instructions are, I cannot let you pass. So they tried to explain, and he said, Papa said, Melville de Mello's in the car. He said, oh yeah, I love to hear the 8 a.m. news, and I really like to listen to him, but these are my orders. So they had to go back. L.K. Jha called the DC, who sent a police van. They went there, and then they started covering it. So I'm not going to go over all he writes about the heartrending sight it was in Birla House. how the people were just breaking down over there as they were filing past for their last darshan and all that. But I mean, that has been covered, so I don't think, I mean, as an
Yeah, that's
event, it's been covered really. It was so shocking to the nation. But a little bit I want to say just at the end, which I
yes.
think is significant, because Papa writes that evening, so this is the evening of the cremation. The cremation was in the morning, and basically all these people who were in Birla House, even the press corps, the VIPs, as the cortege took off, they could not go in their vehicles. There was such a huge crowd for miles and miles, people on trees, in the fountains, even on electricity poles and all that. So they just had to walk. So Papa walked from Birla House to Broadcasting House to file the sort of dispatches for the early morning bulletin and all that. But he said that evening, Sardar Patel also spoke at a meeting. He gave a speech in Hindi, and he acknowledged publicly that the rivalry between him and Jawaharlal was over. So Papa quotes from his speech, and he said in Hindi, Nehru hamara leader hai, Nehru mera leader hai. So, basically saying we acknowledge that he is now.
What Gandhiji wanted them to do, and
Yes,
that was magnanimity of Patel also. He was a very huge-hearted personality as well.
Yes, and
Uh,
actually they did work together in spite of what people think.
they used to work together. They were the two sides of the same coin. Yeah.
Absolutely, they managed to find a via media. So, yeah.
So let's move from this grave tragedy of 30th January, Gandhiji's, to some lighter side and lighter vein. Kashmiris are known for their wit and humor, and your father was also brimmed with this wit and humor, and he was also a great storyteller. Tell us something about any political personality and any humor connected with them, any satire or humor or wit connected with them, which your father must have written in the book or otherwise told you. Bakshi Sahab, Nehru ji का तो बता ही दिया अभी आपने. You told me that when he was calling on telephone, he said, "Who Nehru? There are many. Everybody's Nehru." What about Bakshi Sahab? I heard that there was a queue in Bakshi Sahab's house. He was telling everybody to go in. And any humor, any incident and anecdote you want to say?
Okay. Well, basically, I thought, from 60 to 62, when Papa was covering JNK for AIR, Pandit Nehru visited Kashmir. This was in early summer 62. And so, of course, Papa was also invited to the dinner. There was Bakshi Saab, who was the head, and his cabinet of ministers of the JNK government. So they're all sitting down outside on the lawn, and only soft drinks are being served because Pandit Nehru was a teetotaler, out of respect to him. But Bakshi Saab's major domo, every few minutes, would keep coming up and whispering to one of the ministers, saying, a call is waiting, an outstation call is waiting for you inside. Can you please go take it? So one by one, these ministers would go and have a quick swig of a liquor drink, and they would come out. So at some point, of course, Pandit Nehru caught on, but he didn't want to say anything challenging directly because he was a smart, polite man. So he kind of saw this happen to a few more, and then he turns to Bakshi Saab, he looks at his watch, and he says, "जाओ तुम भी अपना कॉल ले लो क्योंकि खाने का वक्त हो रहा है." So they all became silent, and Bakshi Saab kind of looked a bit sheepish, and he said, "Yeah, I'll see to it that dinner is laid out." So yeah, he retained his sense of humor and a nice witty way to deal with these kinds of things, really. So yeah, you're muted. You're muted. Jugal, you're muted, and Pamposh is also.
Sound disturbance is there, so
Yeah.
So Pampoji,
She's still
yeah.
muted.
Yeah, okay. So now let's come to this closing part of this book. What is the worldview of this book? What about the leadership of this book? I have read the reviews. Avtar Motaji, I value Avtar Motaji a lot because his analysis is very analytical. He's very objective. So, and I also read about this Bakaya, Satish Bakaya's review as well. And Singh Saab's review just now, I see. So, how do you presume, how do you observe that world has treated this book? World has what about the readership of the book? Would like to say anything about it? Compost, you, Dolly?
Actually, the response has been amazing. Of course, now it's many years since the book was published, and it's also now sold out. The Kindle version is still available very easily,
Kindle is
but hard copy editions are, I mean, you do find on Amazon and all, but not that many. But the response initially was also extremely good, much better than we had expected. And when I talked to the publishers, they were also surprised. I talked to their PR person, I don't know what the designation is, marketing, I think. And she said, when you don't even have an author to kind of do a book, to plug the book, it's really unusual. So I was very happy. I'm sure Tara also. And we did a book launch in Singapore, which Tara helped to organize as well. And Kirpal Singh was there. He actually asked my mother to launch the book. So in the end, my mother launched it. And, but it was covered in Singapore. There were stories in Dubai, and of course in India. There were stories. There were even extracts were published in some papers. All the major papers covered it. PTI reported on it, Press Trust of India. So it was very well covered, and I have not seen a single comment or review that is not positive. And people wrote personally to us to say there was such a good book, and people wrote to me saying thank you for making sure the book got published, you edited it, whatever. I only edited the manuscript. But anyway, so people were really positive. In Kashmir, I think it created a little bit more interest, maybe because of the parts in Kashmir. So I think Tara knows about this more, but it was covered in Miras, which is basically a Kashmiri journal. And you already mentioned Avatar Motaji and Santosh Bakaya, both of whom are Kashmiris as well. But others also, people with very South Indian names who wrote reviews, people I don't know. And there's a literary magazine called Earthen Lamp. Suddenly, someone sent me his review. He said, I reviewed this book in the magazine. I had not heard of the man or the magazine. So it was very gratifying. On Facebook at that time, I mean, sorry, not Facebook also, and on Amazon and Flipkart, and what is that? I forget the name of the Goodreads. They were, and all positive
Goodreads.
reviews.
Goodreads is a
It
good
was
platform.
quite amazing. So it was actually very, very nice, very good. It felt very good. What else can I say? In
How do
Singapore,
you people, you and Tara, look at this book? Because the narrative of all these observations in the post-partition time in India, all these happenings are already in the public domain, and there are a number of people, great journalists, who have written all about it. What do you think is an add-on by your father to this
I,
whole
I'll
narrative?
I'll say what I think, and then maybe Tara can add her views as well. Um, I think there are two or three strengths of this book. One
Okay.
is that it's based entirely on aankho dekhi, really eyewitness accounts. If it's not Papa's, it's somebody who has talked to him, and there are only one or two instances where it's not Papa's account. One is Mr. Vanchu, who was the chief engineer when the Kabeli attack happened, and it's
Kabali.
very sad. So I didn't want to read it out, but those who are interested can read it in the book. But 99% is what Papa knew. That's one thing. Secondly,
First
as I
person. First person.
first person account, and my father, I can say this proudly and but very sincerely. He was a very objective man. He had no axe to grind, and he just reported things as he saw them. So he didn't come from any angle. He didn't have any communal idea, class idea, gender idea. He just reported what he saw. So that's a great strength. And finally, it's really an extremely readable book. I have had people write to me and say it reads like a spy thriller, though it's not at all about spying, very little about raw, that's all. But I couldn't put it down, like that kind of thing. And I think, yeah, there's my former boss, top boss. I used to work for the Asian Development Bank. So I sent him a copy, and he phoned me from Japan. He was at a meeting, attending a very, very important meeting in Japan. He said, Pamposh, I have to tell you this. I just took it to read on the plane. I thought I'll read 10 pages, and I was up till 3 o'clock in the night because I couldn't put it down, even though I had an important meeting the next day.
Such an engrossing and this
So
narrative,
it's the
engrossing
style also. It's the
style of
content,
present.
but it's also the style. So I think
That's
those
so
are the
great. That's
strengths.
great about the great writers. I mean,
Yeah.
Tolstoy says that it's very difficult to write easy. It's very easy to write difficult.
Difficult, yes, exactly. Tara, do you
So
want to
that's
add something? Sorry.
Tara. Tara, you want to say something? I'll just unmute you first. Yes, yes. That needs. Yeah,
Pamposh has put it very well. And I actually personally had some friends who were from South India who borrowed the book, same experience, and they said we learned so much about it. We didn't know much about Kashmir and this history. We used to hear about it, but they learned a lot from this book. And for me personally, there were facts about Papa's early life, especially that he wouldn't share with us because he wanted us not to grow up with negativity. So there were things I actually learned from the book, although I mean, my son who was alive at that time and in school and was in Delhi at one time, and would type a few things up for Papa when he wasn't thinking so much of it as a book, but just talking of episodes. So yeah, everybody was struck by how readable it is, which is very important, I
that's
think, in
something very, very
this kind of book, especially. It
desired thing.
Yeah, and I read it very close to a well-known history of that period by an Oxford historian called Alexa Tunzelman. I had read Indian Summer, I think, and then I
Mm.
read the book. And they're often talking of the same thing, but she's got records to back up her case. But actually consciously didn't want to do all that. I once asked him, I said, why didn't you write about such and such? And he said, no, it was only what I knew personally or I experienced personally that
Yes,
was
yes.
known about
That's
it.
very honest.
Yeah.
That's how
Yes.
the authors were in those times. Anyhow, we will now close it up. Before we close it, I like to say that your papa had great mentors like his brother-in-law, Uday Saab, and then T.N. Kaul. T.N. Kaul was already a very established man. Everybody knows about the expertise of T.N. Kaul, and you know. So let's know something about your relatives, your great relatives who are the elites, who are in the power centers like T.N. Cole, like Mr. Bamzai, and a few others. Would you like to just give a brief
I,
summary about your
I,
relatives? Yeah.
I want to say we are a very, very, very close family. And
Okay.
Papa came from a smallish family, but my mother was from a big family. So he embraced her family also and his own, and they also embraced him. But it was a very, very personal relationship. It didn't spill over into the professional life at all. Though Papa did suffer at a certain time for being related to tea and call,
Yes.
when when Kashmiris became less popular in India for one reason or another, when a different party was in power. But he was very, very, very self respecting and very independent. So he never accepted, even if anyone offered help, he would not accept it. And that is very important. It was very important to him, and it's very important to our memory of him as well. But at the personal level, of course, they were very close, the whole family, the famous ones and the not so famous ones. Although, actually, most of mummy's brothers were at the top of their professions. But whatever. As far as Bamzai Saab Bade Papa is concerned, they came together professionally in a sense, but actually it wasn't professional. So actually, Papa got pulled into Kashmir affairs in a way, partly because of Bade Papa, but it wasn't professional because it was not part of his professional duties. So professionally, I don't think they were mentors. Personally, yes, definitely. And they were all older than Papa. Bade Papa, Bamzai Saab, Tiki Mamu, TN Call, even PN Call, Mummy's other brother, her oldest brother Bhaijan, we call him Bhaijan and Bhaijan Mamu, uh, Radhenath Kaul, all of them. Only the youngest brother is younger than Mummy and Papa, so he was not a mentor. He was also general in the army, Hriday Kaul. But the others were personal mentors. The brothers, the sisters were younger, but not professionally. I don't think so at all. Tara, I don't know if you want to.
You talked about your great relatives, and I also meant the not in professional way. I meant in the
Mm.
guidance way, as an elderly
Yes,
family personal level.
of course, of
Yeah.
course.
So now this program is getting to close.
Yes, okay,
We wanted to continue, go on and on and on about this wonderful story. And stories, the ancient, most ancient art, and everybody loves it. Maybe times of from very ancient times.
true.
But I would like to say before we go, before we close up this program, I would like to say what was the message, the great message you gather from your papa's life and experiences, and as well the book. You would like to communicate. He would have liked to communicate to the not only to the diaspora, to the youth of the world, the community of the world. I mean, of the contemporary times.
I think two things above all else:
Yes,
humanity, peace, lack of prejudice, lack of bigotry, live together happily in peace, different communities, different classes, whatever it might be. Look at a human being as a human being, not through the prism of community or caste or social standing. That's one. And the other one is a commitment to truth, which I mentioned earlier also. And that, I think, to some extent comes from his journalistic training. Be as objective as you can and really try to understand the truth. Know your own past, but know true history. Really try to be open to understanding, maybe from all sides. If there are different sides to a story, listen to all sides. That's what I would say. I
that's
think
so.
that would be his message.
That's a wonderful message from Som Nath Dhar through his daughters, especially Pampoji and Tara. And now, certainly, with that wonderful message, we'll conclude this program, today's program. So finally, we have to call it a day. Everything, every beginning has an end. Thank you very much,
Thank
Pampoji. Thank you very
you.
much, Tara
Thank
and
you.
Pamposh. You came, and it was a very enriching, informative, experiential session. And certainly it's your magnanimity, despite of your preoccupied time, you came to this platform of Sheetal of Conversations. I'm very thankful. 61st show of Sheetal of Conversations is another milestone, a historic milestone. Thanks a lot for coming. Best wishes.
Thank you.
Good luck to both of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And
Thank
best
you.
wishes to you and your show.
Thank
Wonderful
you.
show. It was a privilege to share about Papa on it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Pankaj.
Thank you.
So that was Taradar, Hasnan, and Pamposh, the wonderful daughters of this great eminent personality, uh, Som Nath Dhar, who has written this beautiful book, which tells about the ringside account of a person who was there behind the curtain as an honest, non-judgmental, objective piece of literature, and that we have presented in our first episode of the eminent author and the book. So it's really wonderful. It was a great experience. I have enjoyed it. I hope you all must have enjoyed it. So next week we are again going to another arena, another great chapter, another wonderful chapter. It's going to be some native from Kashmir, who's going to talk about some great deal of this Robin Hood in Kashmir. So we'll talk about that maybe a few days after. I'll just put it in the promo and you'll come to know about it. It was really great pleasure to have you all with us, and I'm really enlightened and elevated always to find your support, your magnanimity, your admiration for this wonderful program, Sheetalat Conversation. With that, I would like to say, before I go, I would like to put a couplet. दुनिया में रहो गमजदा या शाद रहो, दुनिया में रहो गमजदा या शाद रहो, ऐसा कुछ करके चलो यहाँ की बहुत याद रहो. This is a beautiful couplet from Mir Taki Mir. With that, I would like to end today's wonderful program. Good night, goodbye, best wishes. Thanks a lot.